Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Daily Kos's The Brief. This is our weekly show about politics. I'm Marcos Mulitzis here with co-host Carrie Alaveld. Today, we're going to have a show about the media and how it covers Washington politics, particularly the Republican Party. Our guest will be Eric Boehlert. He was formerly at Media Matters. He is now the founder and editor of PressRun.media. That media is now a URL extension. So PressRun.media. It is, I can say this pretty comfortably, that it is the best newsletter covering the DC press. And so I highly recommend that you subscribe to it. We're going to have Eric on in a little bit to talk about how the press is covering the media. And a big part of that discussion is going to be the current state of the Republican Party. And Carrie, I know you've been writing about this, and I may have written about it. I think I have written about it. I've definitely been thinking about it. is something we've discussed on this show before quite a few times, is why are they so tied to Donald Trump, who is a loser in every objective possible way? He is a loser, yet they can't quit him. And in fact, right now, they are more focused on trying to make him right about all the crazy stuff he said, and to talk about the culture war issues that he wants to, that he's obsessed with, rather than actual policy. And Carrie, you just wrote about this a couple of days ago, or maybe it was yesterday, how some of these Republicans are trying to sort of transition to talking about policy and like runaway Democrat spending, right? And when they go on right-wing media, that doesn't go very far, does it?
No, it doesn't. I mean, so someone like Senator Kevin Cramer of North Dakota goes on Newsmax and wants to talk about a policy-related issue. He was focused on the Biden administration's recent cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline, which was a huge win in a lot of ways for the environmental movement, climate change. Well, some people are saying it's not entirely final, but it's pretty final. I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't be resurrected.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but anyway, it's a big win. They've been working on that ever since they surrounded the White House arm in arm 3 times over, to try to get President Obama at the time in 2012, 2011 to stop the Keystone XL pipeline. So anyway, Senator Cramer goes on Newsmax, tries to have this conversation about the Keystone XL cancellation, how terrible it is. I think job losses associated with it, the temporary jobs that would have been created, wants to get people interested in rising gas prices. And then, it just all goes to, SHIT. And
Carrie, you can say it.
Oh, it all goes to crap. It all goes to crap.
It all goes to shit. You can say it, Carrie.
Oh, boy. Well, anyway, before he knows it, he's talking about Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and whether or not critical race theory is being inserted into, training in the military. And, it's so what is ludicrous to me is that suddenly the GOP is like, well, we want to start talking about policy so we can find a way to actually hit back against Biden, because Biden himself is not much of a cultural flashpoint for, their base, right? And so they want to get people to not like Joe Biden. Joe Biden's approval rating is absolutely associated with how well Democrats do in next year's midterm elections. So they need to drag down his approval rating, which is still pretty good, even after, the honeymoon period of the first 100 days, things like that. He's still up in the mid 50s, depending on which poll you look at.
But even better than that, he doesn't generate opposition. And if you look at the Obama years, they had the Tea Party. Then the Trump years, we had the resistance.
Yep.
And so we have this recent history of mass uprisings against an incumbent government, the new government, and it's crickets out there.
Yeah, right. And so what Republicans are trying to do is, hey, We need to get back to some policy-based arguments to shoot down Joe Biden's agenda and, tell people why his policies are socialist, Marxist, whatever, and he's going to be the downfall of America. And, number one, none of their voters seem to really be buying it about Joe Biden. They can't give away this anti-Biden merchandise that they're trying to sell at things like CPAC and whatever.
Literally, like they have these Biden is the next Hitler type of T-shirts, and they're sitting there unbought,
not selling.
Now, if it was a black woman on there, or any woman,
right,
or Barack Obama, that stuff would sell like that, right? But the old white guy, they just can't really motivate. You're absolutely right.
They can't motivate, but also that, not only did Trump sort of, just do away with all of the, supposedly conservative principles, because honestly, it didn't take the Republicans very long to walk away from those principles, right? But not only did he totally do away with that, but they primed their entire base to be focused on cultural flashpoints, and that's it. Culture wars, grievances. I just call it like a steady, sugary, soda diet, right? And I called it I said it's like they can't wean them off of these sugary soda drinks and Pop Rocks in order to get them focused on what used to be the red meat of 10 years ago, right? And someone told me that I couldn't mix sugary sodas with Pop Rocks and that wasn't fair. But anyway, that was just a reader critique.
Don't listen to those people. But it's actually an excellent point, because what's really motivating Fox right now is there's critical race theory, because I don't ask them to describe what that is, because they literally have no clue. It's Kamala Harris won't go to the border, right? And it's just an attempt because she's a black woman, and like they think they can try to gin up some kind of fervor for her. But this is, and then of course Mr. Potato Head and Dr. Seuss and all that nonsense, and there clearly none of this has any relevance to the demographic groups that Republicans aren't winning today, and even worse, that they're losing, right? Suburban, college educated, white women, broadly speaking, the suburbs, which are diverse, so it's everything. They're definitely urban dwellers, young people, black voters, Latinos. None of those are really going to be particularly motivated by, oh no, Kamala Harris didn't go to the border, or Dr. Seuss, and they cannot escape that. And so your analogy of it being like junk food, it's kind of apt because it gets them high, right? They get all excited, and they're all, but not enough to hit the streets, not enough to actually organize, but enough for them to keep watching Fox News.
Right.
And there's been a lot of talk about how Fox News panicked after the election. They saw that Newsmax and OANN were building their viewership by ginning up this whole Trump won the election and it was stolen. And so instead of just sort of being confident in who they were and just being sort of a right of center conservative partisan organization, they decided to go all in on the crazy as well.
Yeah.
And so now nobody wants to talk about the deficit. And 10 years ago, that would have been a big deal, because it was a big deal. Republicans, lost their head. But how much of it is Donald Trump didn't care about the deficit and ran it up by $8 trillion in 4 years? Donald Trump didn't really care about infrastructure. We had all these infrastructure weeks that we joked about because they tried and then it never got anywhere. But he wanted to spend, hundreds of billions of dollars on infrastructure, supposedly. So you have these core conservative ideology principles that used to drive the party, and that's all been tossed aside because Donald Trump didn't care. And the Republican Party became the party of Trump, not the party of ideas. They literally did not have a party platform at the Republican convention last year, because that would require ideas, and they didn't even remotely want to bother. And if you go back to 2020, their big idea was actually something having to do with Ukraine. So they were already laying the foundation for what eventually got them impeached. So this is not a party, but is it enough? Is the historical trends where the party in power loses seats in the midterm election, and is that going to be enough to save Republicans? Or we see stories where Mitch McConnell is actually undermining Trumpian candidates in Senate races, trying to actually get a slate that is electable, as opposed to the cranks and ass kissers that Trump is promoting, right? So, I mean, you've also written about this quite a bit.
I got to tell you, I think, the national media is focused on this scrum in Washington about whether or not Biden's going to be able to get his agenda through, and what Republicans are, whether or not voting rights legislation is going to get through, and things like that, right? So I think that at the national level, what is being sort of underappreciated is how much havoc Donald Trump is already wreaking on the states, right? And I mean, the best state to exemplify that is Georgia, where you've got now a GOP primary challenge to Governor Brian Kemp. They thought that once they started fighting against the Major League Baseball and they enacted the voting laws that voter suppression laws, that somehow somehow Trumpers would start to come around and see Kemp as their hero. Well, no, that's not happening. And Trump himself still has a huge axe to grind with Brian Kemp. But what is interesting, there's a few things that are interesting here. I'll try to keep it short. What is interesting is the level of animosity here, right? This isn't normal partisan or normal sort of intra-party sort of wrangling over the direction of the party. It feels much more existential. It's Brian Kemp going to the state convention and getting booed and heckled by people there.
And he is as right-wing as they come.
He is.
And not ideological, to your point.
It's right. Exactly. And it is, two state lawmakers from Georgia who went to observe the sham Arizona audit getting, courage awards or something like that. I can't remember, like warrior awards, something like that for how, what a blow they were striking for democracy and for Republicans or whatever. But, at that convention. So it feels to me like a very existential intra-party fight where it's not like, once it's over, the dust will settle, everybody will hug and make up, and we'll realize that the real enemy is Democrats. Well, of course they don't like Democrats. They hate Democrats, but they almost hate the other part of their party just as much, depending on which side they're on. And I just don't know how there's any way that can't be a recipe for suppressing some of their own voters when they get to depressing some of their own voters when they get to the general election next year.
I have no doubt that Donald Trump would rather have Stacey Abrams as governor of Georgia than Brian Kemp.
Yes.
I have no doubt. He would have a field day with a black woman governor, right? This would just get his juices flowing. And that would show that Dirk pronounced it. Yeah.
And that would be really exciting for him because that's who he is.
And then he would take credit for it. He would literally, we'll make the prediction right now because I'm sure if she wins, he'll take credit for Brian Kemp losing. There was a hilarious story in the Politico. It literally made me laugh. When Trump met with a group of conservative House members to plot out the 20...
It's the Republican Study Committee.
Yes. And they came out and they said, Trump didn't talk about the election. He was focused on the issues. And let's see Trump say that. Like, they were full of crap, right? There's no way in hell that Donald Trump went in this meeting and didn't sit there and talk about Arizona and Georgia. There's just no way. But they're putting on a brave face. And then, the reporter's like, Republicans hope that Trump can stay this focused on beating Democrats next year. It's like, what do you mean stay this? No, he's not even focused to begin with. Like, where has he said his words that it's important for us to come together and beat Democrats? Because that would be something. In his very
first, entry back into the public arena, he went to did we talk about this last week? He went to that North Carolina state convention dinner. And there are front runners there for the Senate primary. It's an open Senate seat that they're going to have there, right? The fight for it. And there's Governor Pat McCrory, who's the former governor. There's former Representative, I think, Mark Walker. And these are pretty conservative, well-known people in the state. And he went up there and just endorse someone else, Representative Bud, I think. I can't remember his first name. But anyway, like he went up there, got up on stage, had Lara Trump say, "I'm not running." And then he was like, "Come on up, I'm endorsing you." And it was like so he completely upended that race with a right winger. This guy's, a right winger pro-Trumper who is probably has a worse chance of winning the state than, for instance, former Governor Pat McCrory would.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to lose this, because I talked about Georgia, we talked about the instance of North Carolina, but I just want to talk about a second about how complete this is, because as I was thinking about it, I was like, Trump is inserting himself in all different kinds of these states, right? There's the states like Georgia and Arizona, which might be in the throes of a political tipping point, and where you've got Republicans who are elected officials at the state level warring with Republicans who are in the state legislatures, right? Then you have states like Pennsylvania and North Carolina, where Trump could play kingmaker only to doom Republicans in the general election, right? And then you've got states even like Ohio and Florida, which are pretty solidly Republican, but where, for instance, in Florida, they enacted a law that messed with their, decades old mail-in voting thing, which had, for the most part, for the past 2 decades, entirely benefited Republican candidates. So even in these states where
it was created for them because it's an older senior population.
Exactly. They created it, and then they pushed it, and they educated their voters on it. And then the Republican-led state legislature there just did away with or messed with how that whole voting apparatus works for mail-in voting. And now, they've injected a bunch of uncertainty into Florida, which conceivably a Democrat could win, even though we never do.
I don't want to get my hopes up, but
maybe they could help us. Maybe they may have. Yeah. They literally may have helped us. I'm not kidding. It's possible. So it's states up and down the line. It's these tipping point states. It's these solidly red states. It's these states where, a really pro-Trump candidate doesn't run as well as a more, sort of traditional conservative might. And he is already doing this, and we're seeing some one-off stories here and there about it, but I don't think anyone's really captured the scope of how much uncertainty he's already injected into the Republican arena in these states.
Yeah, and if you look at a lot of what these people are talking, they're actually litigating 2020. Oh, Trump was right about the lab leak. Oh, Trump was right about the drug hydrochloride, whatever you pronounce that.
Hydroxychloroquine.
Oh my God, I'm impressed. Gotta practice.
Are you kidding? I have nightmares about that.
None of this is true.
Yeah.
Some of it is still, we really don't know the where the virus came from. We actually legitimately don't know, and it'd be good to find out. No doubt about it. But even if it came out from a Wuhan lab by accident, or even if on purpose, Donald Trump still killed hundreds of thousands of Americans by refusing to do something as simple as wear a mask, right? It does not absolve him. But Republicans, if they can blame China, then it's China's fault, right? They're just looking for ways to absolve Donald Trump of any of those things that created a lot of the criticism. Now, you know what the irony is? The irony is that Donald Trump's numbers didn't drop because of the pandemic. It didn't hurt him. If you look at a chart of Donald Trump's job approval ratings, it's horizontal. Nothing, right? Because if you're a Trump supporter, you weren't going to abandon him. And if you were smart like everybody else, you weren't about to go like, you're not going to give him credit for anything. So it really doesn't even matter if he's right or wrong. He lost because enough people were motivated by his terribleness to turn out and vote. It was a turnout victory for the Democrats. It wasn't a public opinion victory. It was a turnout record, youth turnout, record black turnout. And then there was some flips in the suburbs, like we've talked about, white suburban college educated women, right? But it was a turnout election. People's opinions really didn't change. So it doesn't even matter if Trump was right about the lab leak in the end. It doesn't change anything. He still mismanaged the pandemic. He did not keep America safe from one of our adversaries. And yet they're investing, it seems like, all of their energy in trying to defend Trump's honor. And this is their 2022
honestly, let him go ahead. Let him go ahead and do that. I mean, so this ties into this. We have a Facebook question from Tom Brewer, and I hope I didn't totally ruin that name. But anyway, Tom, and he says, do you think we should hope that Trump keeps whining about the election fraud, considering what happened in the Georgia runoff elections? And I say, absolutely. Please let him keep talking about 2020. And this is Republicans' worst fear, is that because elections are always about the future and not about the past, always. And so if he's going to keep just bringing up election fraud and telling people that their vote doesn't matter and that, the system is rigged and he was the rightful winner and whatever, that is anything but what Republicans want to be talking about in the midterm elections. So you want to jump on?
Yeah. So one of the things about Georgia that I think has sort of been forgotten over time, or maybe people didn't really notice, is that Joe Biden won Georgia by a sliver. It was 11,000 votes, right? So it was like 1/3%. It was a sliver. Both of the Democrats lost in the aggregate to Republican candidates, but you needed 50% to move on to win outright. Right. And yet you had both the Democrats win by about 2 points.
Right.
Like it was it doesn't seem, it's only a 2-point shift. 2-point shift electorally is dramatic given that there's only 2 months between elections, right? So
yeah, and that was before that was a day that vote took place a day before the insurrection at the Capitol. So it wasn't a reaction. Right. That vote was on January 5th and the Capitol insurrection was January 6th. So it wasn't like a reaction either to the insurrection.
And we know that the biggest drop-off in the vote was in Northwest Georgia, which is Marjorie Taylor Greene's district. It's the most Republican district. We actually had increased turnout in the Black Belt in Georgia, which is Southwest rural area, had an actual increase in voting in voter turnout. So absolutely, Trump, I think, suppressed his own vote by that infighting. And it actually, I think, it motivated Democrats as well. And the reason that the party in power in the White House loses seats in the midterm is because all the focus is on that president, right? I mean, you're focused on President Trump, President Obama, and then everybody's like beating up on that person. And it demoralized. And of course, government works slowly so that your supporters get demoralized from the lack of progress and the opponents freak out about all the damage that is being done. And so this is why, as we talked about at the beginning, some of these Republicans are trying to shift the conversation to like, let's knock down Biden. Let's make 2022 about putting a limit on Biden. And yet Republicans don't want to do that. They're making it about Donald Trump. And the problem is that we've already seen this show before, right? Donald Trump motivates our side more than it motivates their side. If he's on the ballot, it's a problem because he'll bring out people that otherwise don't vote. But if he's not on the ballot, historically, we've seen it 3 elections now. If he's not on the ballot and the election's about Trump, Democrats win.
Our best case scenario is Trump shows up in some of these key battleground states a few days before election, gives a, crazy stem winder of a thing, but of course he's not on the ballot. That's our best case scenario, and talks all about rigged elections and 2020. That is like juice for our people to get out and say, oh my God, we got to put this crazy down again. The other thing, I just want to make one last point, and then
keep making points.
Yeah. So I think another thing that's being missed here, and I was reminded of this by listening to a rival podcast, which is 538. I mean, they do something a lot different than we do.
Rival.
But
we're all in this. We all
no,
can
no, it's
coexist.
true. We're all into this together, right? So no, but I was reminded of how unprecedented it is for a party to take a president who just lost re-election, right? Who was in the Oval Office, lost re-election, and then say, we're going to hold that guy, his agenda, his personality, all of that up as our main reason for being in the next election 2 years from now, right? What parties usually almost always do in modern American history is sort of take a look around and say, oh my gosh, what did we do here? Why didn't we win this one? And they try to retool a little bit in order to get more voters to vote for them in the next election. If a president, if someone's, there are cases in the Republican Party where someone's run for president, like Richard Nixon, and then has been resurrected later to run for president again after they've lost. But they almost never, ever take a president who has just lost a re-election bid and double down on that president's agenda, that president's persona, and think that that's a winning election strategy for the next couple of cycles. Almost never. It's completely unprecedented in many ways. Yeah, so,
they clung to that loser come hell or high water. Carrie, we have our guest in the green room, so let's bring him on. Our guest today is Eric Boehlert. He's the founder and editor of pressfront.media. That's the URL, pressfront.media. Eric, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So Eric, when we opened the show and we talked about we were going to have you on, I said that your newsletter on the DC media is a must read and everybody should sign up for it. And it is absolutely the best writing on the topic. So I'm really excited to have you on to continue that conversation about how the media is covering. And so congratulations on Press Run. It's fantastic.
Thanks.
I saw Jennifer Rubin said that it was a must read. That was weird.
That's right.
Wow.
People have said nice things. Hillary tweeted about it last year, which was
nice.
Yeah, it's awesome. So congratulations.
Thanks.
So we've been talking about the Republican Party sort of being trapped by their allegiance to Donald Trump, how they cannot quit him, and he's a loser in every possible way, and yet they're doubling down on that. And you've been critical of how the press has covered that, right? Because the press has sort of said like Donald Trump is basically like has an iron grip on the party.
Yeah.
You have a different take on that, don't you? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, they're doing this because they want to do this. These voter suppression laws, they didn't spring out of a vacuum. This has been a 10-year attempt. And you can talk about voter suppression. You can talk about racism. You can talk about, trying to attack free and fair elections in this country. All of this stuff was percolating. Trump made it okay, right? Trump came along in 2015. 5 years ago this month, he came down that escalator and announced his candidacy. And he just he tore the guardrails down. He said to the Republican Party, do whatever you want. Unleash any demon that you thought couldn't be out in public because everything is okay now. So he leaves office. He loses by 8 million. As you said, yes, the Republican Party is clinging to him in this very strange way. We've never seen, Michael Dukakis was not carted around the Democratic Party and as a hero. And so in theory, Trump would have lost. There would have been some sort of rethinking about what happened. But instead, the Republican Party looked at what Trump tried to do. He tried to overthrow an election. He lost 60 lawsuits. And the Republican Party looked at that and said, oh, this was not an aberration. What we're going to do is we're going to make sure we have a backstop for 2022, for 2024. When we lose, we're not going to lose all those lawsuits. When we lose, we're going to have allies at Republican capitals all around the country who will throw out millions of votes and things like that. So the Republican Party didn't look at that horrified and said, oh, my God, we just had the leader of our party try to overturn a legitimate election results. The entire Republican Party looked at that and said, oh, let's make sure we can do that next time. Let's make sure we have our cronies in place. Let's make sure we have our judges that will look at these lawsuits, the 60 lawsuits that they lost, and they only need to win 2 or 3, right? I always say, this scenario, imagine if Biden had won the White House just based on Michigan, for instance. Does anyone think that the Republican Party wouldn't have figured out a way to get Trump into the White House? So in 2024, if Trump runs again, if somebody else runs again, maybe they lose by 2 million votes. At this point, the Republican Party sees that as a victory. Oh, we got this in the bag because we're not going to allow, we're going to have all this recount, these fake audits. So that's the premise. But the press keeps saying, oh, this is, why did every Republican member of Congress, the House and Senate, vote against the COVID relief bill when it had 80% public approval? Oh, they're afraid of, Trump. Oh, they're afraid of the base. Why won't they pass an infrastructure bill? Why are they going to stymie the entire Biden agenda? Oh, it's because they're afraid of Biden, or they're afraid of Trump. They're not afraid of Trump. They want to do this. They want to be obstructionist radicals. They want to unleash, race baiting with this hysteria about critical race theory. They want to do this. Trump has nothing to do with it. And I really feel like the press needs to hold Republicans accountable for this outlandish behavior. Stop saying that they're doing these things to placate Trump, to placate the base. This is the Republican Party today. They don't need to be prompted or prodded in any way. They are a broken, anti-democratic institution, and they're doing this because they want to. And that's the scary part. And that's the part I think the press doesn't really want to grapple with.
Let me ask a kind of unusual question, which is sort of the antithesis, right? Is there anything that the press learned that you think the press is doing better than it did sort of during Trump's presidency and in 2016?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I've written about, this has been a hobby horse of mine for 4 years, calling him a liar, calling them lies. Mm-hmm. The New York Times very quietly made a pivot about 2 months ago, particularly about the election stuff. And they are now using lies in headlines, in news stories. CNN is doing the same. Unfortunately, the Washington Post, I just wrote a week or so ago, Washington Post is still doing falsehoods and things like that. And people say, well, this is just a semantics debate. These words don't really matter. It's fine. We're talking about an attack on American democracy, unlike anything in this country's history. Why can't we have clarity? Let's use the language that's called for. So I'm happy. I beat up the New York Times for 4 years because they wouldn't use lies and they wouldn't use liar, and they burned through the thesaurus in this ridiculous charade. So I'm glad they put lies in the headline now. I wish everyone would do it. Reuters is still not doing it. AP is pretty good at it. So it's a small example of, I think, the press learning a lesson. It's 4 years late, and some of them haven't learned it, but it's nice to see that some of these institutions are willing to change in terms of when it comes to dealing with Trump.
For fun, some of these words, falsehoods, inaccuracies. I mean, they really did burn through the thesaurus.
I have a whole folder on my computer. Trust me. Yeah.
What's weird about that?
Carrie, hold on. I just want to follow up on that point, because it's a good point. So you talk about how some of these media organizations are shifting on Trump. Do you see that, though, extend to the QAnon-aligned Republicans in Congress?
No, and that's a good point. I think the press is failing the QAnon challenge. QAnon is this thing over here, right? It's this weird conspiracy. We've seen some really good reporting on how it's consumed people online, how it's torn families apart. But to me, there's like this weird dividing line between QAnon and the Republican Party. Yes, there's Marjorie Taylor Greene. Yes, there's talk about, how she was a follower. She kind of convinced the press that she wasn't anymore, though she clearly is. There are dozens of Republican members of Congress, from what I can tell, who are QAnon followers. So the problem is the press wants to set up this invisible wall. There's QAnon and there's the Republican Party. You and I, we all know there is no dividing wall. The entire Republican base is swept up in this thing. They're completely divorced from reality. So I would like to see, when we see QAnon coverage, it's the Republican Party. There is no separation. And again, when we talk about the press being slow or timid, it's because I think they don't want to acknowledge these amazing realities. There's two major political parties in this country. One of them is completely connected with a cult that thinks Democrats are pedophiles and murderers. That's a really strange sentence. We've never had that. We've never had this in American history.
Doesn't seem real.
DC press wants to just continue to cover the Republican Party as this kind of this center-right mainstream entity. And yes, there are these crazies over here online, and we'll cover them, and they're dangerous. But that doesn't really have anything to do with Mitch McConnell. That doesn't have anything to do, with the Republican agenda. You bet it certainly does. It absolutely 100% does.
Do they not see it as an existential threat? Because it is, and I don't understand. Yes, no, that's what I mean. Yes, sorry, I should have been more specific. I meant to themselves. I mean,
to the media,
to the media. Like, I mean, I used to report for the Advocate at the White House, right? And I reported on Capitol Hill. I cannot imagine being there now and not realizing what kind of peril not only our country is in,
right,
but me personally and my colleagues personally, as we try to report, because journalism is one of the only jobs that is protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution.
It's the only one that is specifically listed in the Constitution.
Right. And it has to go in the form that it exists. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's better, it's still what we got. It still uncovers some good stuff. It will have to go if someone like, Donald Trump or the next, GOP fascist manages to get in. Yeah, someone smarter manages to get in, right? They are going to, press freedoms are going to be completely undone. We're already seeing what Donald Trump's Justice Department was doing with lawmakers, sitting lawmakers on powerful committees with his own White House counsel. So, I mean, the idea that somehow this isn't going to reach out and grab journalists is crazy to me. And I just don't understand how they're not cluing into that. You don't get a sense that any of them are.
No, I mean, that was one of the great dichotomies, right? Trump unleashed this wild campaign against reporters, insulted them on national television. Now we know the Justice Department was secretly seizing emails and phone records of reporters, not to mention members of Congress. We've never seen an attack like this. So in theory, you'd think, wow, massive pushback. They're going to dig in their heels. I mean, institutionally, they're just going to, if Trump is going to go to war with the press, the press is going to go to war with Trump. That's not what we saw, because what happens, I mean, we've had 5 decades of Republican attacks on the so-called liberal media, starting with, Spiro Agnew and Pat Buchanan, and all the way. So it works. Bullying works. That was the sad lesson that we all learned in terms of the press in the Trump years. Yes, he attacked them. We had attacks on newsrooms. We had a gun attack down in Maryland that was clearly Trump related. But unfortunately, instead of standing up, instead of taking that as a sign that there was an existential threat, as you said, unfortunately, it kind of led to more timidity and a fear. I don't want to be in a Trump tweet. I don't want these crazies coming after me. And because there are absolutely career implications for that. And I'm sympathetic to that to a certain degree. But no, I think they feel like it's the Beltway. They work for these huge institutions. They're protected. American democracy might not be, but we're all doing pretty well right now. And we don't, we can just kind of keep playing this game.
Yeah, there's a sort of sense, well, that was Trump's Justice Department. That's not the Republican Party. But then you have Mitch McConnell basically like, I don't see no problem with the subpoenas. And I don't think there's been I don't think there's been a single Republican that has expressed outrage at that overreach and politicization of the Trump Justice Department. The same crowd that was hysterical about Bill Clinton talking to an attorney general for 2 minutes on a tarmac Now doesn't really, everything's fine and everything's fair game. But even the democracy side, I've seen people, who was it Nate Cohn, who was like, institutions will hold, right? The institutions will hold. The democracy's not really at risk. And I don't know how you believe that, given how close we were to a coup this time around. We needed a Republican Secretary of State in Georgia to hold the line.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
and Trump and his followers are going to try to make sure in 2024 they have their guy in Georgia or Arizona or Nevada or wherever they need it.
They didn't know before that was a litmus test. Now it's very clear what the litmus test is. And Absolutely. They're not hiding it. And they will push electorally. And we are going to depend on Democratic midterm turnout to protect us from that. And nobody ever, that's not something that really makes me feel particularly confident. Right. God bless our people, God bless our base, but they don't have a history of voting in midterm turnouts. And I don't know if this is going to be enough to motivate them to turn out at the same rates that they did, not just in 2020, but also in that Georgia runoff, right? In 2018. Yeah. So you also been writing recently about how the press is covering Kamala Harris. And this is actually kind of interesting because Republicans, clearly, this is something that Carrie and I have been talking about for a while, is Republicans can't lay a finger on Joe Biden, right? They've forgotten how to run against an old white guy.
That's right.
Right. I mean, they had Barack Obama, they had Nancy Pelosi, they had Hillary Clinton, like woman or a black person or all of the above, right? I mean, this is what worked for them in the past. And so now they've sort of trained their guns on Kamala Harris. She won't go to the border, as though anybody gives a damn. Do you think the press is biting, aren't they? The press is what? Biting? I mean, are they?
Last week was not good. Last week was really distressing. Lester Holt kind of played that Republican talking point game, pressing her on that, that NBC interview. Why won't you go to the border? Why won't you go to the border? This is all based on, a Fox News GOP, misinformation. When Biden announced that Kamala Harris was going to help with immigration, it was to stem the immigration, to be a diplomatic tie to Central America. And within seconds, Fox News and the GOP said, she's the border czar. She's in charge of security. She's going to push all these people back. It was a complete creation in terms of what her role was going to be. But it was helpful, and the press played along. And the press has been asking, why doesn't she go to the border? So there was this 30-second back and forth with Lester Holt with this kind of, GOP gotcha question. And CNN 2 days later says her entire trip was overshadowed by this give and take. They basically didn't mention that she gave a 30-minute extemporaneous Q&A in Mexico, and the Mexico president said she was an extraordinarily talented person and things like that. All of that just got flushed down the memory hole because, there was this gotcha moment on TV. And this is, your point is so good about Biden. They can't lay a hand on Biden. And also, during the Trump years, these reporters didn't have to spend 5 minutes trying to figure out what to write. And they didn't have to spend 8 minutes trying to wait for some sort of conflict. With the no drama Biden era, there's no gossip, there's no backstabbing, there's no controversy, there's no crazy tweets. So you kind of start scratching around for interesting content. And I think that's what drove a lot of the bad Harris coverage last week. And another thing that just bothers me, and I think it's cynical and awful, is this kind of this theme that not only is she taking on a diplomatic role at the border, she's also going to be a point person for Democrats in terms of these voter suppression laws. And instead of looking at that and saying, wow, first woman president, first vice president woman, first vice president person of color, taking on these really substantive issues, that's kind of amazing and interesting. What's the DC press? The DC press looks at that and says, oh, that's bad news because she's going to fail. Oh, Biden is kind of putting her in a bad position. And it's so cynical. I mean, she's doing this because she wants to. She wants to make a difference. She wants to help the country. And the press looks at it as like, oh, as this kind of weird process story. So that kind of turned me off too. And that coverage was everywhere last week as well. So they kind of pictured that the premise was, she can't win with these two issues, and she flubbed this interview, so she had a bad week and she's not she's not a very good politician.
I think I just heard a portion of that interview, and they said, I don't know if I heard the whole interview or someone else ask it, and she said, well, I haven't gone to Switzerland either, which I thought was like kind of a funny retort.
And she smiled while she gave that. And it was bad. It was flippant. And
no, I thought it was great.
No, I'm telling you that's what the DC press said.
I know.
And I tweeted that I chuckled that she got points. Harris got points deducted because she smiled too much during her answer. I said, someone tell Hillary Clinton, because nobody knows what the rules are anymore.
I mean, honest to God, I actually thought that was like a pretty, I mean, it made a point.
Yes, absolutely.
And at the same time was funny. And right. I was like, touche. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, okay.
The borders are
no,
river.
That's not good.
The borders are river. You're going to go
it.
Stare at a river, and I mean, obviously, it's
no credit for thinking on your feet. No credit for thinking on your feet.
And the other thing, what you're saying, Marcos, if she had shown up for a kind of a goofy photo op, guess what the coverage would have been? Harris.
She
Harris
can't win.
I mean, can you imagine Harris going down and doing that
camouflage
bizarro thing that Ted Cruz did in the bushes, and he was like, I mean, it's like everyone would have a meltdown.
Oh yeah,
but Ted Cruz.
But when Republicans do it, they're being super savvy, right? And they're creating this narrative, and it worked because they wanted to know why she isn't at the border, and yeah. So I really felt like that coverage last week was really bad.
So Eric, on this same theme, where Republicans really can't run against the old white guy, so they're trying to make it about Kamala Harris. They're trying to make it about the squad, right?
Yeah,
is beholden to the squad, and Republicans are really pushing that narrative. Do you see any evidence that that's starting to penetrate more traditional media coverage?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that's mostly a Fox News thing. I don't think most Americans know who the squad are. I don't think most Americans are upset with them. I don't think, and this idea that Joe Biden, he's been in public life 50 years, and there's so many narratives they've tried to throw against him that just completely failed. Because most Americans have a sense of who he is. And as you've talked about, the fact that he's basically elderly, I was going to say middle-aged, but he's an elderly white man, that's such a huge privilege in American politics, because everything they tried to throw at Hillary, for instance, none of it stuck. Oh, he's corrupt. Oh, he's a liar. Oh, he's been in the game. Oh, he's lining his pockets. He looks like your grandfather and uncle. And that is such a huge part of American politics. So, but to my point is the idea that he's being led around by these liberal radical women and he doesn't really know what he's doing. Again, he's been in public life 50 years. People might not like or disagree with what Joe Biden does, but I think this premise that he doesn't know where the White House Oval Office is, or he's just kind of a doddering fool, it's not going to stick. And this idea that liberal radicals are really running the White House, I don't think it really goes anywhere. I mean, it flies. It works great on Fox News, but I don't think it really jumps into the mainstream.
Do you see this? Do you see the sort of focus of Fox News and whatever in some ways being a trap for Republicans? It does seem like they're aware that they need to get at least some of their messages out to someone beyond this, 35% or whatever it is that watches ON, Newsmax, and so you see, so recently, Mitch McConnell went on Fox News and was trying to talk about something policy related, I think, and he was trying to, poke holes in the Biden agenda and socialists and blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden the Fox News host starts asking him about Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And he wouldn't even say her name. Over and over again, he said that representative. And I think it was because, it's a slight to her, but I also think it was because he didn't want to be quoted as going after her, because he was trying to have a policy-based discussion, and he didn't want the soundbite coming out to be him saying something about,
she'd raise a lot of
AOC.
money from that.
yeah, right. So Is there, so they do these talking points and they get the media, the mainstream media, as we kind of know it, into these GOP talking points, but does it ever also sort of trap them going the other way, where when they want to try to do something substantive, we were talking about this earlier in the show, they're having trouble breaking through with any substantive sort of arguments that in some cases Senate Republicans are trying to push now, because they can't win on their base alone, and I think they realize that.
And particularly, I think, trying to reach suburban women, all those people they lost in 18 and 20. Look, the model used to, and it's a really interesting point, the model used to be Republican parties use Fox News for this rhetorical outlet, but it fired up the base, do 3 years of Benghazi. But the plan was also then to get those independent voters. And Trump came in and he said, oh, we're not going to do any of that. He focused the entire Republican Party just on that Fox News audience. Absolutely no effort to try to expand the base in obviously 4 years, Trump had no policy agenda. Nobody could figure it out besides this tax cut and trying to get rid of Obamacare. So I think in a weird way, the Fox and the OAN and Newsmax, it's become the entire game. And I think electorally, they lost votes. When Trump lost by 8 million, I think that was an indication that you can't really run a national campaign on firing up your base. And again, so for 20 years, the GOP used Fox News in a very specific way, but now it's, like I said, it's basically become the whole game. And we'll find out in 2022 and 2024 if they can still be a national party and win elections, just focusing on that 35% and really giving up, and as you say, any semblance of a policy discussion on issues that affect, swing voters anymore.
Is there something that sort of keeps you up at night when you think about media coverage and the midterm elections coming up next year? I mean, let's table 2024 for another day.
Yeah.
Right now, we need to, ideally expand our majorities in Congress, but given historical trends, just holding our line would be a huge victory. What is the biggest danger from the media in our chances of maintaining the majority?
I think, in kind of a weird way is just, if there's a drumbeat from next January that Democrats are going to lose the House. We've seen that in the past, and they kind of start from this premise that, Democrats are doomed this cycle. And I think it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But when Trump was in the White House, we didn't really see that doom narrative, even though it seemed pretty obvious to me Republicans were going to have a huge amount of trouble. So I in a weird way, I think one of the dangers is we view the entire midterm election next year, the DC press does, of, Democrats don't have a chance, or how long until Republicans take hold, because I think it creates this self-fulfilling prophecy. I think it hurts with momentum, and I think like that. So unless, and particularly I'm concerned if the polling doesn't suggest that's going to happen. If Biden is still doing very well, if the Republican Party as a party is polling at 29% approval rating. So I just hope there isn't this assumption that, Republicans are going to take the House. And that's how we're going to view, that's the prism we're going to use to view the midterm election this cycle as it unfolds.
Hopefully something that will counteract that, and it's something too that we discussed earlier, is just what a shit show Trump is creating on the other side of the aisle right now in the states. So if the national media manages to clue into that, I don't even think they're entirely getting that story right now. I mean, you see headlines here and there of a Trump challenger or whatever, that being primaried from the right, But I don't think that they're really cluing into it. And if there's one thing that can perhaps combat, I just want you to be able to sleep at night, Eric. I don't want you to get, Marcos doesn't want you to sleep and I want you to sleep. So I'm just telling you, it's possible. Possible that the national media will clue into what a crazy town show he's putting on and creating for Republicans on the other side of the aisle. And hopefully that will, feed their like instincts to have a real race. I don't know.
Right.
But,
I mean, they obviously the press loves Dems in disarray. I mean, that's their fallback position. But yeah, I mean, what's that? I saw a headline on CNN today. One of Trump's first rallies is going to be against the sitting member of the Republic, a House member in Congress who voted against impeachment. And as I tweeted about an hour ago, I mean, if Joe Biden looked at a Democrat sideways, that would be a 3-day news story. Trump's coming out of hibernation to try to defeat a sitting Republic. So, I mean, I think the press will report that. I think if a Democrat had done that, it would have been, Katie bar the door. But if he keeps doing this, I think it'll be impossible, as you say, for the national press not to acknowledge the story that, wow, he is not going to help, and he is just, the chaos agent that Republicans don't really want. Because, as you say, if they do nothing between now and the midterms, statistically and historically, they'll take the House. But they can't control this nut job.
Yeah.
So, Eric, we're just about out of time, but I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about Press Run, what you built, what it's about, and why people should subscribe to it.
Oh, sure. Thanks a lot. So, yeah, I launched it about a year ago. It's on Substack. I write 3 times a week, and folks can sign up at pressrun.media. I call it fearless media commentary. It's a look at the political press through the prism of progressives and liberals and Democrats, and just holding people accountable. I mean, and I mostly focus on the mainstream media, actually, the New York Times and CNN, the Washington Post. And yes, obviously I write sometimes about Fox News and the dangers of the right-wing media. But it's really, I try to kind of educate and help people understand why headlines matter, why a topic matters, where these narratives come from, why can't we shake them? Why did the New York Times spend 4 years trying not to call Donald Trump a liar, even though he told 20,000 lies? So, like I said, fearless media commentary, trying to call people out, hold people accountable, hope for a better media, because unlike the right wing, we want a better, robust journalism because we think it's important to our democracy. And so, yeah, pressrun.media. Take a look if you're interested.
Yeah, and just it's a newsletter, so you can subscribe, and it just gets dropped in your email inbox 3 times a week. It's freaking fantastic. I absolutely think it's a must read. So I think everybody listening should go and sign up. Eric, thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure. This topic is not going away, so
yeah, exactly.
We'll probably invite you back in to talk some more about this as the cycle starts shaping up.
That'd be great. Have a great week.
Thank you so much. He made a really good point that how the media frames the election is going to have a big part in, I think, the results. And an honest look at the election acknowledges that, yes, historically, the party in power loses seats. Like, we're not going to pretend that's not the case. But also, you can't ignore that this is ahistorical. It doesn't always happen. It didn't happen in 2002 after 9/11. And we have an ex-president that has a weird iron grip on his party. And maybe it's not his grip, but the party is all in, right? For whatever reason, I think Eric
they chose. They chose.
Yeah. They're not afraid of Donald Trump. They're excited that somebody finally made it okay to be anti-democracy, to be anti-racial equity, and all those things that are important to most people, not just progressives, most Americans. So how they frame that and looking at this is saying, like, this is a weird election. And just objectively, this is a very weird election because Trump is an X factor. Biden's resilience, popularity-wise, is an X factor. However much that Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin screw up the Biden agenda is an X factor. There's turnout is an X factor. Can Trump get his hidden deplorables, people who only vote when he's on the ballot, can he get them out to vote? Can we motivate our side?
Yeah, right. Will he motivate our side? I mean, I was just thinking, like, was it you or Eric who just said if they did nothing between now and November, historically, they would win? I think it was Eric who just said that.
Yeah, Eric. No, he's right.
Yeah, right. And instead they've got Trump. I mean, honestly, they'd be much better just like trying to block Biden's agenda without Trump. Just, I'm not saying that would be good for the country, but that's so clearly the Republican brand now that it seems like that would be more opportune for them is to just wait, try to block Biden's agenda, which frankly, Joe I just said Joe Cinema, Joe Curtsy. No, Joe Manchin. Sometimes I've taken to calling them Joe Curtsy. I don't know, whatever. Curtsy Cinema. No, but Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema are helping the Republicans right now, block his agenda. So they could just sit back and wait and see what happens with the economy and try to find something that they could glom onto. Right. And I think that would probably give them a better chance than what they decided to do, which is to double down on Donald Trump. And there are some swing state, like recently in an article that I wrote on, I think it was a Post article, there was a swing state Republican who went on the record, not on the record, went on background, right? So basically anonymously was talking to this reporter and saying, didn't Trump learn anything from Georgia? He can't focus on 2020. He's got to focus on 2022. And this person, whoever they were, is in a swing district, a Republican in a swing district, and is clearly sweating it out because they have no idea what the heck kind of effect Trump is going to have on their district. And they need those districts. They need more of them to flip. They can't lose any of them if they're going to regain the majority.
Carrie, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for co-hosting with me. This was a very informative episode. I'm always fascinated by the media and its impact on our elections and our politics. Thanks to Eric Bowler for joining us. He's at pressrun.media. That's a URL, .media. It's like a .com, but .media. Pressrun.media. And subscribe to his newsletter. Highly recommend it. Thanks, Walter Einenkel, for producing the show. And thank you for listening and viewing if you're watching this as well. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to subscribe and give us a rating wherever you get your podcasts. You can always talk to us at dailycoast.com or on Twitter at dailycoast. See you all next week.